Hello and welcome to the Friday, March 18th, 2022 Dregs of St. Patrick's Day edition of On Iowa Politics. Support provided by New Pioneer Co-op, celebrating 50 years as Eastern Iowa's source for locally and responsibly sourced groceries, with stores in Iowa City, Coralville, and Cedar Rapids, and online through Co-op Cart at newpi.coop. This week, filing deadline, funnel week at the Capitol, and COVID March madness. Hi, I'm James Lynch of the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and with me today are Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal. Good morning, Jared.
Morning. I'm still trying to find my four-leaf clovers.
The never-ending search.
Amie Rivers of the Waterloo-Cedar Falls Courier. Good morning, Amie.
Good morning, James. Let's better be lucky than good, right?
Yeah, exactly. Erin Murphy, State House Bureau Chief for the Gazette. Good morning, Erin.
Good top of the morning to you, James.
Thank you. And Gazette Opinion Editor Todd Dorman. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
First up this week, the filing deadline for primary election candidates isn't until 5 p.m. today, Friday, hours after we record this podcast, but it appears that most of the major party candidates for governor and Congress have filed successfully. Bob Kraus withdrew from the Senate race because of COVID, which hampered his efforts to get the 3,500 signatures he needed to get on the Democratic Senate primary ballot. Still waiting to see if Glenn Hurst files. And I've heard similar concerns from a number of candidates, especially Democrats, that getting signatures was a challenge because they typically do that at their caucuses, but many counties had virtual caucuses this year, which made collecting signatures more difficult. It appears that State Senator Jim Carlin will be Senator Chuck Grassley's only challenger for the Republican nomination for Senate. Andrew Jackson Foster IV hasn't filed despite proposing a contract with Iowa that includes support for the divine right of parents to raise children free of indoctrination in Marxist ideology, racism, gender dysphoria, and lowered school expectations. That sounds sort of like the mainstream of the Republican Party these days.
Yeah.
He also believes that climate change initiatives are nothing more than legalized theft of natural and personal resources. Of course, if it's illegal, is it really theft? Never mind. And speaking of lowered expectations, former congressional candidate and almost dragon slayer J.D. Scholten is running for a seat in the Iowa House. Jared, is that a safe seat for Democrats? The last time I checked, there weren't any Republicans running in that district.
Yeah, at least through this morning, because I was just checking right before we got on here. There haven't been any Republicans who have filed and are listed on the Secretary of State's website. Of course, it's still possible that someone does before 5 p.m., but obviously that would be cutting it pretty close. And if there isn't someone who files, Scholten, of course, doesn't have a lot to worry about because it's hard to lose if you don't have any actual competitors. And even if someone does file, it would really kind of depend on who it is before I would say how good of a chance they have of winning in a race against Scholten. I say that because Chris Hall, who's leaving the legislature at the end of his term, he represented the Sioux City area for about a dozen years as a Democrat. And, everything's been renamed and renumbered because of the redistricting. But Scholten would basically still be running to represent the Sioux City area or a chunk of the Sioux City area in the Iowa House. If the right Republican with strong name recognition ran, it could be a problem for Democrats because Trump did well in the county overall in the past, but Chris Hall managed to run ahead of that the years that he was running when there were those national elections. The thing is, I don't really know a Republican in the area who would still file this late for the race and would have stronger name recognition than J.D. Scholten, who's obviously run twice now in congressional races, which helps a lot with name ID, especially when you're running in a state house race.
Erin, as you look at the list of filings, do you see any surprises there in who's filed or who hasn't filed?
As far as who has not, I don't see any names missing that I expected to. So, with the maybe possible exception, and you mentioned that in the Democratic Senate primary, we've been hearing from Glenn Hurst off and on through the campaign. So if he doesn't make it to the ballot, that's maybe a mild surprise. I wouldn't call it a shock. But other than that, the names that we expected to hear are showing up. I can't think of any who that I don't see that I thought I would. There are a few maybe surprising or interesting ones that have popped up. Is in We might talk about this a little bit later, but one interesting one is the um, majority leader Matt Winchittle in the House has a primary challenge, um, which is interesting. That's pretty uncommon. Of course, we have someone primarying Chuck Grassley, as you noted, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised by that. Um, but that was one I didn't. I guess I wasn't expecting.
Right. Yeah.
I'll say that.
Amie, there have been some retirements and legislators jumping from one chamber to the other to take advantage of open districts created by redistricting. Any surprises in the Cedar Valley area?
Right now, Roz Smith's seat is open. I just checked, and nobody's filed for the House District 62 seat. Now I do know that two people have announced they are going to run. On the Republican side, Todd Obadal said that he was going to jump in and run, as well as Jerome Amos made a big announcement and noted he was going to run on the Democratic side. And he is a city council member, so he's sort of really well known in the district that way. But Todd's run for stuff before. I think it'll still be an uphill battle for him just because it is a pretty blue district. But the really interesting district, I think, is going to be really district. Oh, shoot. Yeah, there's 76. So this is the one that changed. This is Dave Williams' district, and he's retiring. It used to be pretty majority Southern Cedar Falls, but now it has moved severely south. It's taking in a lot of rural areas that have previously been really Republican strongholds. So it's entirely possible that this is one of the seats that flips Republican, and you've got two Republicans right now, Tony Chavez, who is sort of a Republican Party guy, and then you've got Derek Wolf, who is a Hudson farmer on the Republican side, who have joined Democrat Kate Hudson for challenging that seat. So that'll be a really interesting one to watch, 76.
So, Todd, it appears there will be plenty of new faces in the legislature next year. It also appears that Republicans will maintain control of the House and the Senate. What's the impact of all those new members?
Well, I think they're going to have to wear their name tags because nobody will know who they are. The doorman might not let them in unless they do that. It's leaders and incumbents, veterans will spend more time showing them where committee rooms are and the proper bathroom facilities and all of that stuff. Kind of the first day of school type stuff.
Exactly.
Orientation. Yeah, and judging by Amie just mentioned that seat that's more rural that might flip. There are other retirement seats like that for Democrats that Republicans have a chance of picking off. So Republicans might have to, especially in the House, might have to find more chairs for the the caucus room. Maybe another venue. Maybe they'll have to go to a small amphitheater or something to hold their caucus meetings. So as far as policy, I mean, we know what Republicans have done the last few years and what they'll probably do, at least the big stuff, probably more tax cuts on the way to their goal of eliminating the income tax and, various issues dealing with sort of the culture war and other things. I mean, they'll probably be running on, none of that, with maybe the exception of tax cuts. And it'll be a surprise what actually happens, as it usually is. So, it'll be a change. But, these things cycle. I think it was, in 2006 when Democrats took control, you saw a lot of new lawmakers sort of flow in after that election cycle. And then it stays steady for a while. And then you have a situation like this where it's, Democrats are kind of tired of not having any of their ideas listened to and and banging their head against the wall and trying to talk bills to death. It gets tiring. So It's time to go home, I guess.
Even if Republicans stay in control, there could be some changes in leadership. Senate President Jake Chapman is being challenged by a Democratic incumbent, Senator Sarah Trone Garriott, in a district that Democrats think they can win. Some lawmakers have moved into open districts if they thought they would fare better there. Senate Majority Leader Jack Whitver was one of those, Erin, but he will have a challenger. Is he safe?
I think he'll have some work to do, but he's certainly going to be safer than he would have been if he would have stayed in the Senate district where he's currently lives and represents it, and obviously that's the current district. And stay, understanding those are loose terms given that they were redrawn, but the district that includes the city of Ankeny, and has continued to trend in a little more Democratic direction. Now it's still Republican leaning, but the margins have just tightened a little bit, and that tightness will relax a little bit in this new district, which is the more rural areas of Polk County. So at the very least, as I say, he won't have to work quite as hard, and that sounds good, but that really is important, because that means instead of having to pour his resources as majority leader into his own reelection, and make sure he's protecting himself, he can spread that out to help other members of his caucus, and that's a part of the reason for a move like this. You mentioned the Chapman one. That was interesting, and for no other reason than we would hear occasional whispers around the Capitol that maybe he would move into a little safer district too, and we're hearing that kind of throughout the lead up to this recent season. So he has officially filed now in that district, so we will get that race between two incumbents, Jake Chapman and Sarah Joan Garriott, and boy, that's going to be an interesting one. And it is in a district again similar to Ankeny, but I think even a little more so. It has been trending. It's an area. It's one of those suburban areas that Democrats have made some gains in recent years. So that's going to be a super interesting race.
And how about the woman primarying Matt Winchell? Do you think she's safe? Or is that just a lapse in judgment?
Yeah, her political future is what I'm more worried about. I don't know how safe that is, because when you decide to primary a party leader like that, usually it's not celebrated from within the ranks. So
Amie, I'm wondering if the Democratic primary races for the U.S. Senate and some of these legislative seats give Democrats an opportunity to get their base fired up and improve chances of picking up seats around the state.
That and the governor's race, that's sort of where Democrats have to, try to really put their money. You can obviously get people fired up about, seats changing and redistricting a little bit within those specific areas, but overall, yeah, these will be the state races to watch. And especially, I think, Grassley's seat, not only is he being primaried, but two Democrats are fighting for the right to face him. So I think you're going to see a lot of messaging from now until the primary. And that'll just focus a lot of attention on that seat specifically. And then whoever faces Grassley, well, assuming he, survives the Carlin primary challenge, whoever faces each other. Yeah, I think that'll continue to be one of the ones to watch for sure.
Mm-hmm. There are some legislative primaries in and around the Des Moines area. There's a Democratic primary in a Cedar Rapids Senate district that already seems to be getting a little chippy. There's a three-way Republican primary in a Lynn-Benton County district, and also a Democratic primary in that district. So I'm wondering, some of these primaries, like in the Des Moines area where you have a bunch of Democrats running in the primaries, are these places where Democrats either are a lock to win, or say like the Benton County, Lynn County district, where they're unlikely to win, and how much, I guess I wonder how much effect they're going to have, if it's just Democrats running in safe districts and Republicans primarying in safe districts. Um, I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is I'm looking at this, Jim, and I should have mentioned this before because we talked about wind shuttle. There are a few Republican primaries, including of, and not just because of redistricting. There's a couple other examples of incumbent
Yeah.
Republicans who are being primaried. Skylar Wheeler
Yep.
has a primary opponent over in Western Iowa. Eddie Andrews here in the Des Moines suburbs has a primary opponent. So it is kind of interesting that there's I don't know if it's unrest within the party out there, but that a few of these Republicans are facing uh, primary challenges. And then you have we've already seen organizations weighing in, like the Family Leader and Americans for Prosperity, endorsing some of these candidates in these
Hmm.
races. So
Yeah, and Aaron, that the Skylar Wheeler one too is interesting to me because he already hopped out of a primary that would have pitted him against another Republican incumbent, and so he not only is he hopping out of that to move into a different district that he originally wasn't representing, now he's getting primaried in the new district that he's going to be running in. So that by no means is a layup, at least on paper. Obviously, because he's an incumbent, there's some advantages there, but I'll be curious to see how that all shakes out.
Another interesting primary to watch is this one over in the Jones Dubuque County area, where Lee Hine, who's the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and freshman Representative Steve Bradley are running against each other in a district over there, and we're starting to see sort of the organizations get involved there, where Americans for Prosperity are backing Bradley, and I imagine he'll get support from pro-life groups because Hine has not supported every anti-abortion measure that's come through the House. Um, so it's and in talking to some of these candidates recently, it's interesting that there are some philosophical differences. Talking to a candidate not in that Hine um, Bradley district, but he was talking about that race, just saying that. Hines a little bit squishy on a few issues, and so they're. I'm not sure exactly which issues or how squishy, but so there are some differences there. I was talking to somebody this morning about races in the Iowa, Washington County area, and apparently there's like three Republicans running in one of those districts, and it's sort of the same sort of thing where I guess some people aren't Republican enough. Um, so uh, there's going to be some interesting races out there.
you mentioned that Hine Bradley primary. I just got to share one of the moments from this session that I couldn't help get a little kick out of. So Lee Hine, as he's chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, so all the tax bills come his way, and so he was obviously the foreman on the big income tax bill that the Republicans passed, the big income tax cuts bill, and so he's the one that when they debate it on the floor, gets to stand up and talk about how great it is and defend it from all the Democratic attacks. So when we get to the end, and usually the Iowa Republican majority's practice has been only the bill manager speaks. That I don't know if it's a hard and fast rule because sometimes other Republicans get up and talk, but 99 times out of 100, only the bill manager speaks on a bill. They let the Democrats come in with an endless line of opposition, but only one Republican usually speaks. So we're doing the tax bill debate, and Lee Hine and is almost ready to give his closing remarks. The Democrats are done, and one more light goes on, and it's Steve Bradley gets up to just talk real quick about how much he likes the tax bill, and I just couldn't help but get a kick out of
Yeah,
the primary challenger there needing to get his 2 cents into and make sure that Lee Hine didn't get all the spotlight there.
I've noticed too a number of pictures like in the governor's office where they're like you can almost see them elbowing each other to get closer to the camera. So Well, we've got 87 days until the primary, so get your brackets filled out now, folks. Um, also at the legislature this week was Funnel Week, putting the fun in Funnel Week, all those jokes. We've talked about there didn't seem to be any surprises, but Erin, there was sort of a surprise this week.
Yeah. So as far as no surprises, you're right. Most of the big bills, they've either already done or they're funnel proof anyway, so they didn't have to rush them through the process. But man, the most interesting moment this week was, and we rarely get to see this, was a majority party bill losing a key vote on the floor. And this is so into the weeds and requires so much back story, so I'll do this as succinctly as quickly as I can. But Republicans have been wanting to do a couple things, including some liability protections for commercial truck drivers, and other Republicans have what is a pretty expansive ban on vaccine mandates. And those bills didn't have enough support to pass on their own. So the plan that they came up with was to add these as amendments to a separate bill, and the thinking being, combining those two groups of support together would get them to 51 votes. So when you do something like that, you have to um, amend that to an old bill, and that is then against the rules because it's not relevant to that bill. So the opposing party can say, "Hey, we object. It's not relevant." Speaker Grassley ruled, "You're right. That's not relevant." But then it's no big deal because the majority party can say, "Well, we vote to suspend the rules, so we can consider that bill. That's an option in there as well." And so that's what they did. But they didn't get enough votes to do that, which was a surprise to, including the speaker himself. They said they left caucus thinking they had 51 votes to debate that bill. So either they were wrong about where someone stood, or someone changed their minds in the 5 minutes it took to come from the caucus room to the House floor. And so that motion to suspend the rules didn't pass, and they weren't even able to consider or debate the bill. It died right there on the spot, which was just fascinating, a kind of thing that rarely to never happens.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I really can only remember that happening once in the past, and that was a number of years ago. Um, and what's really interesting too is as Aaron was saying, this there were kind of like two bad bills, put them together and hope you get enough, get 51 votes. And this was not their first attempt. Originally, the tort liability part, the trucker liability part, was part of a bill to cut unemployment benefits. And apparently they couldn't get 51 votes on that. So then they decided to amend it onto this bill that had nothing to do with it. And the people who voted against suspending the rules, a number of them are people who have been the most vociferous advocates of banning vaccine mandates and mask mandates. And then there were a group of Republican lawyers who apparently think the tort reform is not only bad but unconstitutional, and have been hard nosed on this for the past couple of years. So I'm not sure where they go next with this because obviously they're not going to give up on it. Um, but yeah, it was like Aaron said, it's kind of inside baseball if you cover the legislature, and probably of no significant interest to people on the outside. But it's one of those rare moments of drama that we got to enjoy this week.
Yeah, and I tell you, it was quite the scene in the House too. I mean, if you could have seen Matt Winchell in the moment after that happened, he's a pretty stoic guy, and he remained outwardly stoic, but it was pretty easy to interpret the rage that was emanating from Matt in that moment. And then you had, like, Speaker Grassley sent his spokesperson out to address us, and so you have the whole press bench standing up and shoving their recorders in poor Melissa Dage's face, and oh my gosh, it was just it was a very interesting scene, a little bit of excitement in the funnel week for us.
Yeah. The most fun and funnel week. Well, the first COVID-19 death in Iowa was reported March 24th, 2020, which seems like a decade ago. The victim was an older adult, 61 to 80 years of age, and a resident of Dubuque County. Governor said, "Our hearts are heavy with the first loss of an Iowan to COVID-19. Since then, about 9,300 more Iowans have died, despite Reynolds urging Iowans to protect their health and the health of others, because we all have a role to play in limiting the spread of this virus." That didn't seem to go well. Perhaps legislators didn't hear her, Erin, because as you mentioned, they've been attempting to put limits on vaccine and mask requirements. They would prevent schools, daycares, businesses from asking for vaccine passports, prevent them from requiring employees to be vaccinated. And if they discharged an employee for failing to be vaccinated, the business would be subject to a $50,000 fine, with half of that going to the employee. In addition to witnessing the House action, you had a virtual front row seat as a Senate discussion of similar legislation unfolded this week. And unlike their hero, Donald Trump, Senate Republicans claim that COVID-19 vaccine is ineffective, with Senator Jason Schultz saying, "We need to put a rest to that. COVID-19 is an effective and safe vaccine. We have to move past this semi-quasi-science clergy who have turned what used to be a respected industry, the science industry, into a club to beat people over the head."
Yeah, that was uh I mean, and it shouldn't have been, right? Because we've heard that out there. That's that kind of stuff has been out there in this world for going on 2 years now. But I don't know, somehow that still jolted me when I was covering that committee meeting and heard that, and it's the kind of stuff that's just so widely and easily refuted. The data is remarkably clear on this. The medical community is in um, unanimity and in agreement on this. It's just it's not a debate point. It's not a he said she said. It's not Democrats think one thing and Republicans think the other. It's just absolutely not true, and was just remarkable to hear that in that committee meeting this week. And again, I don't know,
What was the
maybe it shouldn't be.
what was the response when he said that?
That was interesting too. It was his closing comment on the last bill of the of the agenda. So there wasn't, the Democrats didn't speak up. I will say, so I covered another committee hearing the next day, um, and I overheard a couple Democrats mumbling under their breath about Senator Schultz's comments about vaccines from the previous day. So clearly they had thoughts, and they just weren't afforded the proper channel the first time. But yeah, it was, like I said, it was kind of perfectly timed as that last moment of the meeting, and so there wasn't any kind of real big follow up or reaction.
Yeah. As we quickly learned, COVID-19 could trigger respiratory tract infections affecting the sinuses, throat, windpipe, lungs, and cause numerous other complications. But throw this out there to Todd and Jared and Amie, who knew it would also cause people to lose their minds.
Yeah.
That's a legit long COVID symptom, actually. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, my faith in humanity was shaken a bit by the whole Trump getting elected, but it was still, still fairly solid. I thought, well, and then COVID came, and I thought, well, this is scary, but surely people will do everything they can to not get it and to help make sure other people don't get it, and do all the reasonable, responsible things that we ought to do. And politics shouldn't play a big role in this, but I was wrong. My faith in humanity was too faithful, I guess would be the way to put it. So yeah, I mean, it shouldn't have surprised me, but it did surprise me how sort of this fell into sort of the partisan political trenches that were already well dug. I think the fact that the the president we had at the time probably contributed to that by being sort of erratic and dismissive of the whole thing, mainly because he was worried about his reelection chances. Uh, and the vaccines, when they first came out, I went and got my first 2 doses in like Muscatine. I mean, I thought everybody was crazy looking for some place to go, so I just figured, everyone's going to want to get vaccinated, right? Well, no, 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 not everyone wanted to get vaccinated. In fact, not everyone, could even get on board with the fact, as we just heard from the scientist in the legislature, Dr. Schultz, that these are not even effective or safe, and there's microchips in them, and where's Bill Gates, and Fauci? What's going on? So, yeah, it shouldn't have surprised me, but boy, you losing their minds is that became a primary symptom, and you didn't even have to have COVID.
Right. It's kind of interesting to me that early on we talked about this war on COVID. I mean, everybody used these war terms and analogies, and that as a nation we were going to unite and defeat COVID. Obviously, it turned out it wasn't quite that simple, but it's now looking at the response to the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion there, and it's almost some of the same people who opposed all the COVID measures seem to think, yeah, hey, Putin might be right. He's got a case to make there for invading Ukraine, which it totally
There's some
surprises
overlap in the
me.
Venn. Sorry, there's some
Yeah,
overlap in the Venn diagram. There is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah. I mean, it seems like such a no-brainer that Americans would stand up for Ukraine, and yet we have these people who are defending Putin, or at least sort of questioning the validity of, I mean, the validity of Ukraine to exist, and it's just wow.
Information spreads just as quickly as virus. So
Yeah.
you got to be careful there.
We've
Right.
gone from talking all about the Wuhan lab to talking about the bio labs in Ukraine, and Marjorie Taylor Greene has switched subjects. I don't know why the Jewish space laser hasn't been deployed in Ukraine. I mean, that's a powerful weapon. It started wildfires in California.
I kind of wonder if in like subsequent primaries and stuff, especially for Republicans, if like one of the qualifiers that they're going to have in these races, like to try to differentiate between one candidate and another, is like I refuse to get vaccinated when COVID was a thing, and then their opponent will like have to say that they also didn't get vaccinated, and that'll just be one of the things that you use to determine who to vote for in some of those primaries in some of these places.
Yeah, I had that same thought when we were talking about those Republican primaries. What kind of litmus test that there will be in some of these races? And I almost hesitate to share because it's so depressing. But as we're talking about this, it just perfectly fits. I got an email from a reader talking about that story and defending Senator Schultz, and one of the lines that I just got to highlight here. It's just so frustrating. The real misinformation is coming from the experts that I cited in my story. And he lists here Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and all people with the Associated Press all have a vested interest in selling vaccines. I mean,
which are free.
It's just right.
Small detail.
I'm not sure how. First of all, I'm not sure how the Associated Press benefits from selling vaccines, but if they are, can we get other newspaper companies on board? Maybe it'll save our industry.
Erin, do your research, man. It's out there. AP, man. It doesn't even stand for Associated Press. God. It's like, it's like awful
it's
pharmaceuticals.
Latin for vaccine.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, add up the letters. It's.
Okay. Well, speaking of depressing news,
has anybody been following the big explosion in COVID cases in Europe? Has anyone been watching that? Because I'm running around mask free and
And
fancy
Hong Kong,
free,
too.
and then I'm seeing this stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah.
no, don't.
Not again.
Yeah.
Omicron, but faster.
Yeah.
Great. That's a good. Is that like the marketing for the new variant?
Yes.
Like Omicron, but faster.
Yeah. Well, speaking of depressing news, today we say goodbye to Amie Rivers, who's been part of this podcast and sharing her insights. Amie, what awaits you?
I will be the new labor and politics reporter for Iowa Starting Line, which is online, just like the Courier is, but no paywall. So if you got frustrated with the subscription, like I do sometimes, come on over to Iowa Starting Line, and I'll keep my Twitter handle and everything the same. My email and phone number is up there, so please keep sending me politics ideas, and that includes you guys, by the way.
All right. Good luck with the new job.
And as a surprise, we've brought Jeff Kaufman here with us to send off. Oh wait, he's not. He's unable to join. Oh, that's too bad.
Jeff and I don't have bad blood. Jeff tried to get a little rile up out of me, but no, he's going to be my bestie after this is all over. I'm telling you.
He'll be your best source.
Yes, that's right.
Well, that's it for this edition of On Iowa Politics. If you enjoy the podcast, tell your friends and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Fan mail may be sent to podcast@thegazette.com. Stay up to date on the Iowa legislature by subscribing to the Capitol Digest newsletter under the Iowa Legislature tab at thegazette.com. And don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today can be found on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Waterloo-Cedar Falls Courier, Sioux City Journal, Mason City Globe Gazette, Muscatine Journal, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Imperfekt will take us out, and if you know an Iowa band or musician who should be on the podcast, send us a sound file and subscribe to On Iowa Politics. For Amie, Erin, Todd, Jared, and our producer, Stephen, I'm James Lynch. Thanks for listening. Be well.
Welcome you to the show. Mike Hand Recording's crew. Running things around here, just act like you knew. What? Imperfekt. It started with the microphone in my right hand and evolved into a indie label called Mike Hand Recordings. Reporting from Cedar Rapids, I-80. Inner city, jump, skip, and I hop from the highway. That's where I stayed before the days of the flood, before the city was covered in muck and everybody's stuff littered the streets. I'm speaking literally. We had 6 feet of water in the kitchen at least, but that's enough on that subject, cause it'll get me upset, and I don't think you wanna see a grown man cry in the city of 5 seasons, even more smells. It ain't hard to tell, people around here are bored as hell, getting psyched for Saturdays when they're super fresh. Small place, big dreams on the road to success. Mike and the crew, the cause, collective, Midwest indigenous MCs respected. From near to far here we revere the art, taking charge of the hip-hop scene so we can raise the bar. They're faking hard, we keep it really, really real, acting like you don't know. Catch my nippy little spiel, moving swiftly on your heels, but the fact is I'm lapping you. Cause of your half-stepping attitude, melodramatic crews who never had a clue, chuckle with a bad excuse, but really, I ain't that amused. You down with MIC, H-A-N-D. You down with MIC, H-A-N-D. You down with MIC, H-A-N-D. Now throw your hands in the air and come along with me. You down with MIC, H-A-N-D. You down with MIC, H-A-N-D. You down with MIC, H-A-N-D. Now throw your hands in the air and sing along with me. Yeah. Mike Hand, check it out, y'all. Cedar Rapids, stands up, hip-hop right under your nose. Keep me on MySpace. I'm old school, I don't fuck with that Facebook shit. Peace out, perfect.